Oh, welcome to the Faith Roots podcast, and a big welcome to Jonny, who's my guest today. So Jonny Mellor is part of the leadership team at Church Central and heads up something called Sputnik. So I'm just going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that, just to give us a bit more of an introduction, and anything else that you want to tell us about yourself before we get going.
Whoa. Anything else you want me to tell you about myself? Well, I'm Jonny. As Dave said, yeah, I'm an elder at the church in Birmingham, Church Central, and also been quite repetitive and run something called Sputnik. And I suppose that's the thing you're probably alluding to about explaining. Sputnik is a network of Christian artists, essentially artists being defined not just as art GCSE, sort of painting, drawing, etc., but all of the arts, so dancers, rappers, filmmakers, poets, etc., and working with those of a Christian faith, essentially, would be the best way to understand it. Probably what might set us apart or put us slightly perpendicular to some other Christian arts groups is we would work with artists who would be making work specifically for a universal audience, and working outside of the Christian subculture, really. Mm-hmm. So not really making, say, art for explicitly evangelistic or devotional purposes, but actually just wanting to encourage artists to love Jesus and make the best art that they can, and hoping those things will, pretty sure those things will coincide at some point, but maybe not shoehorning them in, if that makes sense. Probably need to unpack that as time goes on, but
certainly will. Yeah,
that's a start.
You mentioned a range of things, so I know that one particular area of art that you're involved in is rapping. So how do you get into that?
Yeah, rap is just something I've been into since I was young. I guess my first experience of rap music, I'm from Surrey, Woking in Surrey, which is hardly the home of hip hop, is it? But I must have been about 11 or 12, and came across a group called Public Enemy, who would be reasonably famous in the genre, and I just found it. I found there's, I suppose, an exoticism about it. It's very different to my life, but I think more than that, there was a force and a power and reality to the music that I found really arresting. And I guess I'd been in an upbringing where generally in our home it would have been art by Christians for Christians, really, music particularly, and I wouldn't have described it in this way then, but I reacted to that. I found it reasonably anemic. I just didn't do anything for me, but I thought it might be the right thing to listen to because it's what was played. With rap, I found something a little more immediate and visceral, and kind of grabbed hold of me. I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I had a love for language from a young age anyway, and that kind of dimension also came in. So basically, the thing about rap and hip hop would be that there's a very fine line in it seems between listener and practitioner. So it looks like you can, I'm listening, I like this, or I don't need to sing, I don't need to play an instrument, I can just rap. Now, obviously, it's not quite as fine line as it seems. There's a craft to it. A very strong craft to it, but you can get involved quite easily, and so quite quickly would be writing raps. Found friends who were doing the same in a number of bands, and that's continued, I guess, for my whole life up until this point. In the background, I'm always writing. It's how I would process things a little bit as well. I would be writing lyrics a lot of the time about experiences I'm having, or just silly rhymes, just kind of to pass the time, I suppose. So yeah, I guess that's how I'm involved in rap. I suppose that's how it grabbed hold of me.
Amazing, and that probably sort of gets us into one of the areas we might want to sort of dig a bit further into, because you kind of alluded to that. But when you think about art and I guess particularly sort of music from sort of the Christian context, there are sort of perceptions about what Christians sing, what they play, what they listen to, both in terms of church and sort of their general life. I guess I grew up when there was, sort of I guess probably both of us actually, the generation sort of prior to ours would have had particular views of even stuff that we would consider sort of fairly mainstream now in terms of pop and that kind of thing. But now there does still seem to be this, here are the acceptable art forms. Is that something that you've found a challenge? What would you say in terms of finding acceptable art?
Certainly, I think coming from the background I came from, and then moving quite strongly into an art form that would be seen by most people, particularly traditionally, as transgressive by nature. Obviously, this question was posed quite early on, and I mean, as a teenager, I would have had. I was still following Jesus, at least I was trying to, and I was a little bit of a double life teenage thing going on, but I was trying to follow Jesus and trying to listen to his voice. And my mum and dad taught me at an early age. One thing I remember my dad saying to me was, whenever you buy an album, to ask Jesus before you in the shop, it was Our Price, I think it was, ask Jesus if it's going to be, will this be helpful for you? And I remember doing that from the start. It was actually a U2 album, which is not rap at all, as I'm sure you're aware. It was a cassette in Our Price, and I remember standing there. It was Acton Baby. I was like, Jesus, is this going to damage my walk with you? Is this going to enrich my life?
I could go about. I was supplied with this wonderful book called Pop Goes the Gospel, which was this rant about, and I think very badly researched as well, but I think it became the handbook of what to buy to kind of annoy everyone.
Well, I imagine you two would have been on it at the beginning and then not at the end. I imagine they would have dropped
probably
off a cliff at some point.
Yeah. I mean, Elton John even got a hard time. So we agree on something. I think for me, from that point though, as a teenager, I tried to pick my way through and kind of invent rules as I went along, probably to my own pleasing, really. Rules from if there's F words in the chorus, I won't listen to it. If it promotes marital infidelity, I won't listen to it. But other things are fine, and then I would just change those. And it was a little bit. It was contrived, but I think I would actually say that I learned to hear God's voice more in these sort of conversations growing up than in any other way, really. TV and film as well. Just asking God, look, how do you speak to me? With that uncomfortable feeling in my stomach as I'm watching this film, is that because I've eaten something funny, or is that because you're saying, nah, this is not really doing you any good? But I guess actually growing up, and I think that's it. I do believe, I believe that I believe art has a power to it, and I believe we need to take that seriously. It shapes us. But I also think growing up and looking back on that, I think there is another feeling in your stomach, which is just the discomfort that art is meant to produce. And so I think within rap particularly, there would be some stuff I didn't listen to as a teenager that I said, no, I'm not going to listen to this. It made me feel a certain way, or it seemed transgressive to the point that I thought this is glorifying something. It's encouraging me down a path I find really unhelpful. But now I would listen to it in that actually what I thought was glorifying something was actually just documenting experiences of human life that are really important, that we realize life is like that. And so I think I would say rap has been really helpful to me in opening up my eyes to experiences of others that I would never have had in other ways. And so I take it as a real gift, as a window into humanity and a particular human experience. And I would see art, probably one of the ways I've changed my view of art, would see it very much in that way. Is it's a very human, it's one of the most human things, art, I think, in all its forms. And therefore it has, it's fallen humans, it has the fallenness, but also the glory of humanity in it. And also it can give that telescope into what is it like to be a human being in all its shapes and sizes. And so I only see that from my perspective firsthand. For me, as an individual, but through art, I can see other people's experiences. So very specifically for rap, it would be an art form that grew very specifically from Black male urban experience to start with. I mean, it was those things. It's diversified a bit from there, but that's where it started, and would have had a window into that experience that I think has been really helpful in my life since, really. Yeah. So there's pulls at sort of two kind of things there. I mean, one thing that sort of strikes me is, and I think sort of just in terms of how things speak to us as Christians, that one of the sort of challenges that can be the acceptance of people, which I think is what the issue with Adam Fix is the desire for safety. And I know it's sort of one of the challenges with people like Lecrae, that there's been that sense of, here's somebody, they're a Christian, they're a rapper, that's great, here's someone who's cool, put them on a platform for a bit, and then they actually start to say things like, for example, on race and the church and race, and suddenly there's this sort of drawing back of, you said too much, we'll have you on the platform, you can do your music, you can do your thing, but don't challenge us too much. And I guess that raises sort of one question then of how we give people space to challenge us beyond what we would want to be comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to say here. Lecrae would be a very good example. I'll just go on record here. I think the way Lecrae has been treated by the church at large has been appalling. I don't know Lecrae. I don't know all that's going on, but I've never heard anyone accuse him of like living in a way antithetical to the gospel. The things I've seen them accusing him of have been completely petty, and for someone who I think has done such a fantastic job of being a Christian and looking, you know what? Not everyone might know who Lecrae is. I guess. Do you want to interview? I'll talk about Lecrae, but do you want to introduce Lecrae on me? Because some people will think, who's that guy? Or is he a guy? I don't know. That.
You tell us a bit more about him, and then give us a bit more context.
Lecrae, I guess, would be the most popular, successful Christian rapper who would rap as a Christian in the Christian world, and quite clearly in the Christian world, ever really. So,
and I think as well was given support by people that we would, that Christians would recognise as mainstream. So not from the so people like John Piper were and have supported him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he would be a Gospel Coalition guys and all of that stuff. And his story, I guess, and you can see why he took a left turn at one point. He changed, like human beings change. That's something I think that a lot of evangelicals need to get their head around. He just changed as a person does. But he started off as, he would be self-proclaimed in his first releases. He was self-proclaimed as not primarily a rapper, more of a minister, almost a kind of youth work rapper, really, using rap very specifically for Christian ends that I would agree with, that I think were important. But there's whole songs about that, but then would have taken he was very good at it. But then as time went on, what happened was, I think partly he changed in his thinking, but also people outside of the Christian culture saw that he was making a lot of money, I think, and had quite a large audience, and thought, well, we're getting on that. And so I think it was 2008 or something like that, he was approached about a mixtape called Church Clothes, and that was produced by a number of figures in the secular rap scene who would be pretty much top of the game, really. And he took that offer and produced in Church Clothes, I think, a collection of songs that is fantastic. I mean, let's be really clear. He wasn't backtracking on his Christian commitments. He wasn't even hiding them. He wore his heart on his sleeve. The whole thing was about his faith, very, very openly, but also incredibly winsomely as well. Now, he did have some critique for the church in there, the established church, but on the whole, I mean, the whole thing was Christian in every sense of the word, and it resonated with a secular audience, which is incredibly difficult to do, and almost nobody achieves this. Lots of Christians, I think, oh, artists should be able to do this all the time. So you get your Delirious, they're very good in Christian world, so let's put them on Glastonbury, crash and burn, so they go back to Christian world again. And I'm not even blaming Delirious. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But Lecrae managed it. And so you're thinking, wow, this guy should be lauded. And what happened was, on the whole, not immediately, but as time went on, actually the Christian world, both within Christian rap circles and church circles, turned on him for things like you're working together with unbelievers. Do not be yoked with unbelievers. For example, if a young person listens to the artist you're working with, they may be led astray. Which I mean, I just think is preposterous. I understand the thought, but go back to the Bible.
You criticise him for that as you head off to work at your bank or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even artistically, though, I mean, if you look at the building of the temple in one of the biggest artistic enterprises in the Bible, like that was done. Solomon worked with Huram Abi, who was he was from Tyre. He wasn't an Israelite. He was a pagan, and he got him to help him build the temple. I mean, so in Proverbs, Solomon. Sorry, I'll get on my soapbox here. This is what you wanted me for, Dave, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Proverbs again. Solomon, he includes writings in Proverbs in the very Bible itself
that have been brought in from
non-Israelites,
Egyptian proverbs and things. Yeah,
exactly. King Lemuel, people like this, and so I think that is an incredibly shallow judgment. And to be, even if he got that wrong, his heart was in the right place anyway. But he didn't get it wrong. The church got it wrong, and people should. Yeah.
Which probably picks up on the other thing that which is how we make those decisions about what we say, what we do, who we work with, what we listen to, what we absorb of. How we get that balance right in terms of that risk. And I think some of us, I guess now our tendency will be to overreact to a kind of a legalism that we will have experienced and grown up with. You talked about this in a sermon just before Christmas at Church Central, where you were talking about the fruit of self-control. And for those that weren't at Church Central, which will be the other two people that listen, the sort of the general gist of that is that was that self-control doesn't mean complete abstinence. You talked about Jesus being one that was accused of being a drunkard and that kind of thing. So I guess there's that sort of reaction of. It was nice and easy, wasn't it? These are the places you go to. These are the books you read. These are the activities you do. This is the music you listen to. But I think much harder now for guys in their sort of 20s, 30s now that are saying, okay, we've left all of that behind. But how do I make godly decisions in life without it going the other way to the sort of the license? Just do what you please.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different ways to approach this. I think I'll go with this one, see if anything else comes up. But I think really zooming out a bit, I think a question that I think is really important to ask when we come to Scripture is where in the Bible are we living at the moment? The stories of the Bible and the backdrops change. So where the Mosaic Law is written is the people of God have a unified, you're living in a society with a unified value base that is towards Yahweh. In the monarchy, it's a theocrat. Well, it's not theocratic because it's kings, but again, similar thing. The value base is there, and that's a very specific place to live. In when Paul goes to Athens and he speaks to the Athenians, he's speaking to people who have a certain relationship to faith. They're interested in it. They're pagans. They've got no experience of Christianity at that point. They're not very hostile to it. They just think it's a bit silly. We're in a difference in our day and age. The thing is, the question, where are we? And therefore, the Bible is all relevant to us. But I think there are different times. There are different parts that are the lens that we can kind of put right on and help us with this question. And I think as we realize, I'm sure in our culture, we've gone from being an Athenian sort of thing of kind of skepticism and a bit of ridicule, which I think I would have grown up thinking that's the world I lived in, to actually more of a out and out hostility to us as Christians, and a world that is not built at all on is not just not built on Christian principles, it's reacting so strongly against them that it's toppling them all the time. And I think I think we live in Babylon essentially, and very much in and that's the lens. And I think for me, I keep at the moment coming back to Daniel. I think Daniel, particularly as regards art, listening and making, as Daniel, I think he was a creative mind as well as prophetically gifted and all of that sort of stuff. I think it's really helpful. But for Daniel, it's really fascinating to me that Daniel, he's an Israelite from the Israelite tradition, this kind of holiness, purity, separation from the world. But he's then put into this situation where he's got to navigate the world that is just completely foreign, hostile. They're trying deliberately to turn him against God in Babylon. And so it says in chapter 1, they train him in the language and literature of the Babylonians. I mean, it's an art course in art that would not be very savory. I mean, this is not going to get in your Pop Goes the Weasel book.
That's it. Yeah, because if people want to sort of check out, you can go and you can see some of this stuff. It's there readily available, the sort of stuff that he would have been, the culture is absorbed into. You can see examples of it in the British Museum. You can get sort of pictures of the stuff online. You're right, it is graphic at the kind of level that we'd be saying, I don't want the kids to see that stuff.
Yeah, but Daniel, he didn't just endure, it seems anyway, that he didn't just endure it, that he actually really became a student of that stuff. And I say that because when you see then Daniel's visions that he has later in the book of Daniel, his dreams that he has, a lot of that imagery has seeped into the dreams themselves, to the point where you think, no, this has become deeply embedded in the way he thinks.
He's dreaming Babylon. He's dreaming as a Babylonian, isn't he? He's having a Babylonian
exactly
vision.
Yeah. And I cannot imagine a situation where Daniel's just like, he's not engaging with that art form in a way that he actually is appreciating some of it, because otherwise he's not going to be dreaming it. So you've got the example with Daniel as someone who's trying to work through how to live in this hostile environment. And I think that's where we are. And I think the call on us as Christians surely has to be, we need to engage and live in this world. We've got a choice. We can either withdraw, and that can involve a whole load of different things. And I would say as well, it was podcast, I'm sure, is not long enough for this, but there are biblical arguments for withdrawing. I think that is true, and I would respect some who would have more of a withdrawing from culture sort of a approach, but that would tend to involve creating just restoring to our churches. You got to work for 5 days a week, but really you're looking forward to Sunday where you can survive, work, and just go back to where the action happens on a Sunday, and part of the church community. But really, I just don't want to be tainted here. And I know that would be in the ether for many Christians. And I think that is, if we continue down that line, prophet of doom that I am, right or wrong, Christianity will die. I mean, our country will die because we'll just become more and more irrelevant. And sin's not just out there, it's in here. So we're not going to escape, as we're finding in the evangelical church at the moment. The biggest problems in the church are not coming from outside, they're coming from inside. We can't escape from all this stuff. And Daniel's a wonderful example of, I think, a different kind of holiness to what I grew up with. Whereas holiness was always billed as separation from the world, what Daniel models is a righteousness that exists in the middle of the world. It's a faithfulness to God that is not waylaid in the world, but manages to thrive in the cauldron of Babylon. And I believe that Jesus is powerful enough and his spirit is strong enough that that we can, as his followers, do that. I think we don't do that complacently. I think we need to draw on the wells of the Spirit in every way we can. But I would want to encourage anyone, look, you might be at a place now where you can't engage with any art that's not from the Christian subculture. That could be where someone's at because of temptations they have and stuff. But I'd be wanting to say, in your Christian discipleship, you've got to get over that. You've got to get to a point where you can be not just listening to art made by unbelievers, but that you can enjoy it and gain the humanity from it at the very least, because art's a brilliant window into people and a way of engaging with the world around us, so that we can begin at the very least to build bridges with people and become fluent in the languages of those that God has called us to love, essentially. So I guess in short, there's a rambling answer. I'd say for me, it's not about abstinence as regards. So we're on art as regards abstaining from art forms that's not Christian. It's not even avoidance of unsavory art forms. I think sometimes we need to. There's some art that I would examine, that I think I need to know about this, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I think that's different for different people, but I think that's important. There's some that said, no, I feel like I can dive into this, and I need to pull out the good and resist the bad. But I think where I'm at spiritually, what God's done in me, I can do that. But all the time, it's about balance for me. In that, the question is, am I feeding myself enough on God's word and on His Spirit, that that's defining me, and I'm doing this as a child of God, full of the Spirit, not being taken to sea by these currents. And complacently, you could say, oh, this doesn't affect me. No, I think art does affect us, which is why I love it. Yeah. But we need that balance, is for me the important thing. It's not a holiness, it's not a separation from, it's I cling close to Jesus, I study His word, bury myself in His word, get the mind of Christ. And actually then, like Daniel, I can thrive in Babylon and then influence the Babylonian culture rather than be influenced by that culture.
And that's going to be different to the kind of the mentality of, I guess, the sort of the sortie into Babylon, which I think is the other way that we approaching sort of the art as evangelism. So you put on a Christian concert, nothing against those. Sarah became a Christian because a friend invited her to a concert at her church. Great, that was what God did at the time. But I think you're saying there's something different here that we need to be doing other than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to hear that about Sarah would vindicate that course of action completely. And I know there'd be many who would be in a similar boat as God's becoming Christians through artistic enterprises that are done. Can you hear that? My kids are screaming. I don't know if you can.
Brilliant.
Hear that. Ignore them. So in short, that is valid. I think I would have a number of questions though about that as the paradigm for Christian artistic engagement. And one is, it's incredibly limited. You're not going to reach out to many people that way in a grand scale. I mean, you've got an album that tops the charts, whatever that means nowadays. You're going out to millions of people, millions of those people are not just listening to it, they are engaging, they're really getting into that thing. Whereas if you go to an event, we're going to invite you to your event, you go to your friends, you badger them to come along. It's a good event if you get like 20 people to come, and it's just not effective in that sense. I think of the example of the Christian comedian circuit, and I really appreciate, we've had a number of Christian comedians at church. I think they're great, and I, again, like you said, I wouldn't want to knock this for those who are called to do it, but you'd have like say someone who come to your church and you get like 30 people along, and they do a really good show, really funny, and then talk something about the gospel. It might even be quite light anyway, but it gives a good introduction to Christians, and they go away thinking, oh, look, I laugh, those Christians are okay. But then you've got someone like Milton Jones or Tim Vine, who are kind of packing out like whole kind of stadiums, even in many cases. Now, there's a general background feeling, oh yeah, they're Christians, what a good job they're doing. But there's not this sense, but they wouldn't be seen as Christian ministers. Whereas a Christian comic who would go to different places, we're going to the church, it's a ministry event, it's going to be before our Alpha course. That's really Christian, that's powerful. Milton Jones.
I've seen Milton Jones live, but I've seen him on a panel, so on the sort of places we wouldn't get to. So Mock the Week and that kind of thing, and do something really important as a Christian that we should be doing generally, where I've seen him as the tone of things has descended, and then basically him, without making a big deal, not saying I'm now a Christian and I'm going to tell you about this verse from the Bible and condemn you, but just subtly just change the direction and the tone of things, just a joke in that says we need to go a different direction here. And that is Christian ministry, isn't it? In terms of saying this is being salt and light and being different here. Yeah,
and maybe it's slightly different to talk about, but he's as a celebrity as well. He would be someone who people could then see. Here's a model of a Christian who seems all right. They seem okay. So basically, so the main problem I think would be that evangelistic art works with people who are already quite close to faith. We live now in a world where less and less people are in that situation, and actually they're not going to come. People are very unwilling to come to church events, more so than ever I've known, in many ways. Traditional, like evangelistic events like this, I suppose, like the ones we're talking about. And so I'd say that if that's all we're doing, and we're pushing and saying, if you're a musician, the most godly calling is for you to be a musician, either devotional or overtly evangelistic. If you're a comedian, I don't know if you can have devotional comedians. I suppose they're called preachers, aren't they, in some circles? But in openly evangelistic, well, you're really limiting the number of people who are going to engage with that are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Where actually we need people to be faithful presences in the world, and that I think is the calling that we need in Babylon. We need Daniels. We need people who are actually serving, not even, I think, intentional, being very intentional in our evangelism is something that is good to have as a guiding principle. If that's your modus operandi and that's your posture, though, that everyone can see, in Babylon, that doesn't work. I don't think that doesn't influence well. People just turn off from it. And so we need people who can be involved in all forms of culture and society, just living out their faith in Jesus, which is what we're told to do, to shine our good deeds so that people can see and praise our Father in heaven. And I think artists are very good at shining in that way, like a Milton Jones. I think it would be an excellent example. I think we should be, as churches, actively supporting those artists and pushing all creative people to say, yes, you might have a separate calling that's more in the church, that's possible, but the default setting is that you get into the world, you become good at your craft, you keep loving Jesus, and you just make good art to the standard of your discipline. And that's a blessing. That's, at the very least, you'll be a blessing to people, but probably you'll also shine something of the gospel into a very dark world.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Jonny, and plenty for people to think about and ponder on. So thank you very much for joining us.